Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. Let's see if this thing works. Yeah, that's me. So I am here today to talk to you about how content marketing and marketing in general could potentially save the world. This presentation is all about how to get rich, famous, and happy while making the world a better place. So let's see if we can get there. So we're going to start out with a dogma you're probably pretty familiar with. There's this whole notion that the internet is the location of the 21st century, that all customer relation touch points are mediated in some way by content, that since people can self-serve in order to find answers to their questions, if you are not the one there to answer people's questions, someone else will be, and steal your opportunity to establish credibility, to build a relationship, to reduce your sales cycle times, to build your valuable first-party databases and all that kind of stuff. So there's imperative to achieve content excellence in a competitive way, and therefore the mantra is that we all must become publishers, okay? So I think this is true. It's true that we do have to achieve some level, often, of content excellence with our organizations in order to be present. But is that all we need? And this talk today is a lot about how the publishing model and way of thinking things is definitely one of the pillars of success for what we need, but it's incomplete. Because we can sort of get there by asking, how are we doing at this publishing game? So this is the depressing stats section of everything, okay? So year after year, we see studies like this. In fact, these two charts span 3 years. And generally speaking, you know, roughly in the 70% zone, often is people responding to say that they don't feel very happy about how their content programs are doing in one way or another. And this is pretty persistent around those numbers. There's also the famous SiriusDecision stat about how a lot of marketing content just goes unused altogether. There's the depressing stats around how much traffic is lost to non-human traffic and how little visibility there is to ads or little click-through there is to ads, and how much accidental click-throughs there are. Like there's a few different studies here that range in the 50 to 60% zone for how many mobile clicks are accidental because people are fat-thumbing their way through to your website. And also kind of was amused by this about how one of these studies broke down how people feel about it into annoyed, frustrated, and angry. I thought that was a very unusually granular parsing of data in that moment. And then another thing that we find commonly across various studies are that doesn't mean that content is going away. This is probably one of the few areas in business where a lot of, on aggregate, depressing success still is showing persistence, because usually when things fail, especially in big corporations, you get axed or that kind of thing. You know? So it's interesting that notwithstanding the tremendous challenges with having content show good business results, that people are still committed to it. So while there are points of light and amazing work being done on there, in aggregate, in our industry, we're great at making content that no one wants, that upsets people when they accidentally see it, when they're not robots, and we're not feeling that great about it, but we plan to do more, right? So in aggregate, that is kind of the snapshot of where we're at today. Not you, I know that this room is filled with excellence, but you know, out there, so you can go out there and help them, right? So why are we stuck? So, you know, and I think a lot of us bring this up. I think David alluded to it earlier. We get often caught in this black hole. Michael Brenner also talks a lot about this. A lot of people point this out, that we get caught in these sort of egocentric kind of black holes about ourselves. And that manifests in a number of ways. There's brand egocentricity, there's product centricity, there's organizational structures that hold organizations back from creating a more seamless customer experience because of their fragmentation and so on. And so a lot of this is this very egocentric black hole kind of stuff. Now, in the world of B2B, often we find that we do actually still need to get better at telling our own story. So this is not to say that it's not important for us to brag about ourselves and tell the world when and where we're relevant. We definitely need to do that. But that's not all we need to do. We got to turn this black hole into a value generation big bang, right? And so if you think about the center of that as that sort of more product and brand value kind of thing, as you move outward from that, from being self-centered to being other-centered, from self-centric to customer-centric, you start to see some things happen with the content value propositions as you spread out from there. So you might go from product features and benefits out into consultative selling kind of value, where to the point of the HubSpot video earlier, you kind of ask people what their goals are, and you start to think, okay, how do we tailor what we do to really meet you and where you're at, instead of you evolving to be where we're at in terms of what we do. And then you have things that I call application adjacency value. So this is where, let's say that you're a safety manager who's responsible for people in construction not falling from things or having things fall on them and so on, or wearing their respirators, and you're responsible for making sure that people actually wear their safety equipment and all that type of thing. And you're dealing with people who speak multiple languages, and you're dealing with these macho people who think that they can just walk out onto I-beams and they're going to be fine, right? You know, so there's all this stuff around how they manage their people that you can help them with. So managing compliance is something. Now, you're not selling compliance management, but you're helping them be better safety managers through content and services that might help them do this. Then the further out you get into non-application adjacency value. So you might be helping people with their career paths, or helping small business owners just be better small business owners, and so on. So my argument is that we really don't have a publishing problem for the most part. Businesses are hemorrhaging content left and right, and as we can see in some of those earlier stats, people just aren't always that excited with how they're doing with it, with the results they're getting back from their efforts. So my argument is that it's less about publishing, because while we do have to develop those skills, and I don't want to understate how difficult it can be for organizations that are not media companies to acquire some of those skill sets, that is very challenging. But there are other skill sets that are siblings to publishing that we need to develop in order to actually become relevant. And I argue that this isn't a publishing problem, it's an innovation problem, it's an entrepreneurship problem. So we have to get really good at identifying what it is that keeps people up at night. And this is something that if you've done content marketing strategy or anything even adjacent to that term, you know when you're working for businesses that getting people to think outside of the box of their business is a tremendous challenge. So how do you get that empathy? How do you do the research? How do you figure out what it is that is really going to help remove friction from people's lives, provide them platforms for success, propel them forward? And then ultimately where I'm going to go on this talk here, this first section is really about getting level set with the room here around the fact that content can generate business value, and that content that's focused, that's customer-centric can generate business value, but ultimately how some of the best frameworks for actually figuring out how to be valuable don't come from business at all. They come from nonprofits, NGOs, civil society institutions, and those organizations that are really focused on empowering people and building sustainable civilizations. The methodologies that come from them are every bit as important as anything you will learn from the world of publishing. And I'll justify this at length momentarily. Now, one of the examples I love to show about customer centricity is if you think about what keeps people up at night, this is a dentist, and this is well-researched stuff around what are the top pain points of dentists. And none of them have to do, for example, with the products that 3M sells. 3M sells a lot of products to dentists, and absolutely zero of them have any adjacency whatsoever with the things that actually keep people up at night. And we see, because of this challenge of trying to get better at this, we have folks like Content Marketing Institute come into being, right? Entire, arenas of practice are being built around helping people get better at doing this stuff. And again, you'll see that a lot of this stuff is talking about value and relevance and all that, and there's a focus on the publishing model. Folks like Jay Baer was a really good example with utility. This is one of the best examples that I saw over the past 10 years of someone really coming out with thought leadership that was about helping identify how it is you can be helpful and relevant to people so that the content that you're producing isn't just talking about value, but it actually contains value. It's actually something that people would buy or that will really deliver value to them. And then if we look at some of the famous examples in content marketing, we can see some of the business value aspects, but here, if you start to look through this lens, you can begin to identify the social value and social entrepreneurship dimensions that begin to come out in content marketing for people who get it right. My argument is that just as the internet has made it so that inevitably the world of business and non-publishers have to acquire the methodologies of publishing, I also argue that it is inevitable that we learn the methodologies of social value and social entrepreneurship. And it's partly inevitable because you can see that often it starts to become accidental. And this is one of those examples with Amex Open. So we can see that them just producing content and creating community that's exclusively dedicated to help small business owners be better small business owners also is a #1 source for lead generation for the division that actually manages this property. But what's interesting here is if you start to look at this through a social value lens and something that ladders up to the UN Sustainability Development Goals, what you see here is economic empowerment. You're actually helping small business owners be more successful, which is good for the economy, which is good in a real way, and which is good for human sustainability. And so you can see that some of this stuff that will be called out in the UN Sustainability Development Goals actually is reflected in this, while at the same time it's generating business value. Other famous examples maybe are a little stronger on business than social value, but Kraft Foods show that if a well-managed omni-channel ecosystem of media can build incredible first-party data, proprietary that could be used to generate insights about customers, that can be used for product innovation or incremental variants, that could be used for good targeting models to DSPs and so on. We saw with Xerox's chief optimist that by creating tailored publications for executives, you can do end runs and actually get to the executives and contribute massively to sales pipeline. And with Indium, you see that by taking that kind of employee ambassadorship and transparency to the next level, in their case, because they have a lot of engineers specifying into their company, that by having their internal engineers, who are often in those specification discussions, by having them publish content that would be interesting to their audience, they were also able to increase leads by 600% within 1 year. And then kind of some of the frontier here with things that are emerging, a lot of people have been making kind of a big deal out of the Arrow Electronics case study lately, where instead of saying, okay, we know that electronics engineers, their big pain point is how do they stay up to date in education about the world of what they need to learn to be good engineers in electronics. Instead of, okay, building websites and a new community and having big campaigns and trying to win at SEO and compete against all these other people who already exist, they took an acquisition approach and bought over 50 properties. And along with that, and this is the lens you need to look at it through, or at least one of them, is they were buying the underlying network value. That network value that builds domain authority and SEO, the network value that makes influencers influential, the network value that is the underlying structure of how tribes interrelate and social and so on. They bought the credibility, they bought content teams, they bought existing properties, they bought all this stuff. Okay, so strategically, this is very important to understand for a whole number of reasons, but this underlying network value is a really big piece, and it's also very important to understand if you want to generate value in a social entrepreneurial way, because leveraging network value is a very powerful thing. Now, this framework up here, I've analyzed literally thousands of content-related projects because I'm a juror for various content marketing organizations. I've done this stuff a lot. And I'm also a juror with a UN organization called the World Summit on the Information Society that awards people who are using information and communication technologies in ways that further the Sustainability Development Goals. So I'm really into exhaustive frameworks, and this pretty much sums up all the different ways that you can drive business value, laddering up to things like customer lifetime value. So this is a good framework. I use this a lot for assessing value potential for organizations and that kind of thing. So this section has been very much focused on business value. And by the way, I don't know if they're giving out these decks, but hit me up on LinkedIn and I'll get you all this stuff if I'm moving too fast. Anyway, so the whole front part of this was just kind of getting level set on business value. And so what my argument is now is that by merging business value and social value, this is where content social entrepreneurship as a business strategy starts to take off. Now, this is the other thing, if you're into frameworks and all this kind of stuff, you might want to take a picture of, because this tool is, what I did was I've analyzed a lot of different value propositions that are underlying content in ways that empower people. That's what's over on the left. Now, if you take that framework and do things like evaluate your non-audience goals and processes against them and how some of these qualitative outcomes could emerge as a result of the value you're delivering, and look at your stakeholder ecosystems for new value opportunities, which we'll get into in a moment, and then use these outcomes to inform questions for stakeholders to probe for new situation opportunities. So, and literally, I can't tell you how hard I've worked on that list to try to summarize it in terms of all the different things that I've analyzed to try to identify foundational value propositions. It's probably not 100% comprehensive, but it's like in the 90s for sure. So social value is a thing. Social innovation, Stanford has a social innovation organization, and you can see how they define it as a novel solution to social problems that are more sustainable and effective and so on. We also see, social entrepreneurship as a term, and if we look at the definition here, it's the attempt to draw upon business techniques to find solutions to social problems, okay? Now, what I'm talking about is also inverting that, which is how can we use social techniques and value propositions to actually solve business problems? So it's actually kind of inverting that. We also see that Michael Porter was in on this. In 2013, for a while, they were talking a lot about shared value around how businesses, if they find more ways to generate value to more of a stakeholder ecosystem, that they could, obviously do a lot of really good things for the business and relationships. But you can even see, and I love this line up here, reshape capitalism and its relationship to society. Okay, that's a big bullet right there. By saying that if we transform how we build relationships in ways that generate more value, thinking outside the box, we could actually do something like get to some concept like socially sustainable capitalism. That's a big, big, big thing. So this idea that maybe you could be involved in this and how you're generating business results and transforming capitalism puts you on a pretty fascinating avant-garde in terms of really the history of human evolution. So this is not small stuff. And another person to really look into in a whole area of theory is called stakeholder theory. And this is this whole notion of how is it that you really look at these total ecosystems to identify where value can be. Because if you only look at your business and your customers, often you're not looking at the broader ecosystem of partners that can also be involved in solutions and identifying synergetic value between them. And we see this a lot in urban planning and all that kind of stuff, very sexy stuff that people are doing with cities, is often when you try to deal with poverty in one area and education in one area and food issues in another area and childcare in another area, often you get a lot of redundancy, a lot of inefficiencies, and you miss synergetic value when you say, oh, if we taught kids how to grow food, they could help solve the food problem, that could go into the schools, and the food work is going to be part of their educational program to learn design thinking and digital skills to be more 20th century oriented and blah, blah, blah. It's when you start to actually cross the different silos of problem domains that you find synthetic opportunities. And that is all about, let me go back here. That is all about identifying this total ecosystem. And this is some very important stuff here around understanding that social economic forces affect the business environment, and the world of business affects social forces, so that when we only apply solutions to one of those domains, we miss the opportunities to address how they're actually interconnected, which, as Edward Freeman says, is actually both an intellectual and a managerial failure to describe the business environment as it exists today. So that's some pretty macho stuff to throw at people, and I think it's beautiful. So my aha moment with all this stuff goes back to the early 2000s, where I was doing projects for people like Smithsonian and History Channel, and I could care less about business, because I was all about culture and how do we get the story of slavery told and Native Americans and all this kind of stuff. And I was sort of a Ken Burns of the internet guy. And we're doing really well at the time, winning Webbies and having fun and doing social value stuff and everything, and it was really great. And I didn't think I would ever get into business. And at that time, we won an award from this organization called the World Summit on the Information Society, which I mentioned earlier, which is dedicated to how is it that people can use digital information and communication technologies to be pillars for, at the time, what were the Millennium Development Goals, which have moved on to the Sustainability Development Goals. And you can see the different categories of the projects here: e-business, commerce, journalism, culture, heritage, all these things that ladder up. So now those things have switched over to the Sustainability Development Goals. Now at that time, my first corporate gig was with Johnson & Johnson, working on a suite of tools and technologies and information to help people living with diabetes manage their condition and reduce the friction of managing their condition, such that if you think about things like meal planning is very complicated and difficult for people with diabetes. They have to be very careful about these things, and it takes a hell of a lot of work to manage your diet when you have that condition. So we had things like, you could just go in and tell this technology the food you like to eat, when you like to eat it, whether you ate snacks at certain times or not, and it would automatically generate meal plans for you as far into the future as you wanted. It would send you via SMS, and this was back in 2005, so early days, I think. It would send you shopping lists at certain times, all sorts of stuff to remove friction from the process. So when I worked on this, I was like, well, this is super cool, okay? You know, they're doing stuff that's actually helping their people. Yeah, they got some banner ads and whatnot on there, but it was really felt very altruistic, and I'm like, I could get into this because this is about helping people into the world of business in a way where it's like, yeah, I feel like they're earning the relationship with their customers this way. They're deserving it, if you will. And so I thought, I can get into this. And this is kind of before the vogue of content marketing started. This was, kind of in early days of that stuff. But it was the revelation that really set me on a career path to a large degree. So as I mentioned earlier, the Sustainability Development Goals are what the Millennium Development Goals came, and this is the stuff that's going to keep our species not only going, but thriving. And if you use this as a value framework model for how you empower and help people, you're going to get a lot of really good ideas for your content. You're going to make, I guarantee it, if you get good at this, you will make the best content that exists on the planet, and you will help people and help human sustainability in the process while driving incredible business results. That's what you'll get by merging these things. So here's some examples. Can we save lives? Okay, so there was this, I had this very bold title, can marketing save the world? And so let's look at that. And so let's look at Sustainability Development Goal 3, good health and well-being, ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all ages. So a big deal in India is infant and maternal mortality. A shockingly high proportion of women and children die in the process of women trying to have children. So that was a Millennium Development Goal way back in the day. Now, there's this thing that came out called Apanjan. Apanjan is a text message-based, an SMS-based information service that delivers health-related information to young pregnant women. It's timed from when their last period ended, and it goes up to the second year of age of the child. And multiple times a week, they will get information which helps them to identify early warning signs of issues so that they can get on top of it, and also help them, with tips and different things in order to remain healthy and have a healthy child and ultimately not die. Now, here's a few, I could really just focus on this case study alone and make the entire point, because this case study actually reveals a number of incredible insights. Number one, within a year and a half, this was just launched in Bangladesh, okay, so imagine Bangladesh. Within a year and a half, 600,000 women signed up for this. 600,000 in Bangladesh alone, within a year and a half. Number two, they charge for it. Number three, so it's revenue positive. Number three, it's actually free to the super poor. In other words, you only pay if you can afford to pay. If you can't pay, it's free, and there's no difference in the service. Now, I know what a significant portion of you are thinking. You're thinking, well, if this thing is free, and the free version is as good as the non-free version, nobody's going to pay, right? But this is a tremendous insight, I think, out of this project. 80% of the people who participate in this pay. Think about that. They could get it for free. And this is India, stereotypically a very poor place, right? And it is, okay? So the fact that out of 600, and that sample size is ridiculously huge, 600,000 women, and 80% of them pay. And so this is, I think, the best example in the universe of content marketing I've ever found that proves, and I think this is another maybe building a little bit on David's point earlier about fandom and giving things away. This is maybe another dimension, a sibling of that, where when you give something of tremendous value, people are like, thank you, I actually want to support this. So I think this is really beautiful. Now, Another thing about this to understand is that these organizations that do this are not big businesses. They're NGOs, they're startups, they're groups of students, they're people with no money for the most part who do this, okay? But who in here has built a marketing database with 600,000 people in a year and a half in their career? Who's done it? 0 hands, okay. So that's maybe another one of the number 6 things I could have said about this project earlier. But another thing is that they can't scale. They're too small. They work out negotiations with telecoms for reduced SMS costs, and they do a lot of stuff, but they can't scale it. So like a year and a half after that Appanjan came out, I met this guy in Sao Paulo at one of the World Summit events in the World Summit Youth Award. And this lovely young man built basically exactly the same app as over in Bangladesh, right? But he's doing it in West Africa, right? And I'm like, hey, have you ever heard of these folks, Appanjan? No, okay, so build connections, relationships with them, all right? This is the problem. Now imagine that you're a $14 billion healthcare company who's trying to get entry into the African, Latin American, or Asian market, okay? Are you connecting the dots yet? You could put up billboards, you know, along, you know, next to airports in Morocco and different places like this as you're starting to expand in this country, or you could potentially get 1 billion people into a database within a couple of years if you scaled that same platform across Latin America, Africa, and Asia, okay? Nobody does this. This is the thing. And because I'm a judge in both these worlds, and I literally review over 100 projects a year in this kind of World Summit Award, and I review a lot of stuff coming from business. And I see these groups of students and guys like I was just showing you a moment ago kicking the ass of these companies who have massive budgets and they just can't get it right. And you'll go and you tell them this stuff and they just don't get it. And I'm like, how can you not want to get 1 billion people into a database that's GDPR friendly, that has a person saying, yeah, communicate to me multiple days a week, sure, influence me that I probably should wear respirators because of the air health and my child that I'm walking through sidewalks and sparks are flying onto my kid and I'm covering their face all the time because that's the reality of the world, and they don't know about respirators yet, and you're still in a process of getting your distribution built into that world, and they can have a bonded relationship with you. I mean, just go on with that, right? So I believe that this is the potential. And if we go back now to the purpose of this previous slide where we think about what Procter & Gamble was doing, which was a beautiful project because a lot of girls weren't going to school because they would have their first menstruations, and menstruations were taboo, and they didn't have bathrooms in these schools, so they couldn't go somewhere and address the sanitation issues and all this kind of stuff. So one of the first things that Procter & Gamble did, kind of like the Duracell example of giving away batteries, is they gave away tampons and whatnot, but they also built bathrooms in the schools. And this was also part of a relationship development things with the local people as they were entering into those markets. But if you think about scale, think about coupling. I don't want to say that you shouldn't do things like that, but if you couple them with things that are digitized, your capacity and your reach can really be quite incredible. There's also a lot of cool stuff you can do. We did a project with the University of Michigan, and we proved, using actual science on a sample of 1,700 young adults, that if you have content that's highly tailored to the psychographics and motivational psychology principles of the individual, you can actually reduce smoking addiction. So we actually got smoking cessation up to 30 days in a really statistically high proportion of the students on this basis. And think about the psychographic profiles you're building of people from a healthcare and personal motivation and psychology perspective as a result of doing these kind of things. If you created an app that did things like help people, overcome addictions, keep exercising, stay on their diets, whatever their things are, we actually did a project that proved that you can do that if the content is highly tailored using things like hope theory, psychographic models, Carl Jung's stuff. I mean, it's really quite incredible. And there's very little evidence that any smoking intervention program of any kind, including nicotine gum, there's very little evidence that any of these things actually work. It might be placebo effect that's actually helping to get people to quit smoking with some of these things. It's so statistically insignificant that it's hard to tell if it's placebo effect or not. But our results were so ridiculously strong that it made the best case that I've ever seen that content can actually really transform people. And then, okay, so another point I want to build on here as time is winding down. Earlier when I was talking about this issue of that multi-stakeholder world, how do you sort of look outside the box of your initial target people to find partnership potentials and synergies and things like that? So here's a real world example. So imagine that you're trying to, get into, rapid development in Mexico or Asia or wherever and be involved in building airports or doing all that sort of thing. And you really want to build good relationships with the deciders in the government. So the government's the decider, and you're in the private sector. And now in the middle, you've got this development bank. You've got these people with all this money, right, they're going to throw at this thing. And they are the influencers to get, this is you, these are the influencers, and that's your target, right? So you've got this ecosystem here, but you've also got civil society, you've got startups, you've got media, you've got academia. Now, all of these organizations want to figure out how to work with the startups, right? All these big companies are like, how do we work with the entrepreneurs? How do we do all this stuff? How do we do this? So by creating partnerships, for example, between the private sector development banks and the governments, you can access and do a lot of really cool stuff with the development world through events and all sorts of different things, and ultimately end up with something like this. Now, one of the insights that I came across in doing stuff like this is that a particular development bank had 2,000 researchers at their disposal who could build content for free. So all of a sudden, through this partnership, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, we don't have enough money for agencies and content, and how are we going to get it done? Well, through a partnership, you might suddenly unlock 2,000 people to do all your work for you for free, right? So anyway, it goes on and on. Anyway, so I'm sort of at time here, but my main point here, as I started out saying, is that yes, publishing is very important. We need to produce content. It's essential. It's always been essential, ever more essential in the internet era. That publishing methodologies are important, but that we also need to learn from other disciplines such as startups, NGOs, entrepreneurship, and social innovation in order to avail ourselves of the value frameworks and opportunities to actually create content that can make you rich, famous, and happy, deliver incredible business results while making the world a better place. So that's my message. I hope you found it inspiring and interesting, and thank you very much.